even know how to start it or stop it.
So our speaker today is Dr. Chris Sheppard. Chris did her undergraduate and PhD at Cornell in Ithaca, New York. The program responsible for bringing the peregrine falcon, for example, back from the brink of extinction, which was so dear to us in the Bay Area. When she left Cornell, she joined the New York Zoological Society, or as we all know it, Bronx Zoo, where she rose to become curator of birds, responsible for their wonderful birdhouses and bird collection, but also working closely with them on bird conservation even while there, in captive breeding programs, for example, to reintroduce endangered birds back into the native environments, and on the Patagonian penguin, for example. When she retired from the Bronx Zoo, she joined what is now the American Bird Conservancy and has been working for the last several years on the threats to our native and migrating bird species from our increasingly hostile urban and suburban environment. And that's some of the work I think she'll be talking about today. On a personal note, Ruth and Chris are both Minnesota girls, didn't know one another in Minnesota, but were roommates in college at Cornell. And since Ruth and I went to medical school in the Bronx, we continued our friendship. You know, when Chris was at the Bronx Zoo. And Chris is actually the only person other than ourselves who was present at our wedding 49 years ago next month. So we have had a very, very long friendship and dear friendship. So I hope you all join me today in welcoming Chris Sheppard. Yeah, we should be able to take some questions and so on after.
We ready? Thank you. I realize I've got my first two slides out of order. So just to clarify, there are two different issues that sometimes get confused. We're not going to be talking about what happens when territorial male birds start attacking their reflections in the glass. They'll do this repeatedly. It can be very annoying, but they don't usually hurt themselves. What we're talking about is what happens when birds fly full speed into glass, not realizing it's there. And this is, results in high levels of mortality of birds across the world.
Sorry.
We're okay?
Yeah.
In 2014, the Smithsonian published what's called a meta-analysis. They went out and they got all of the monitoring information that all the different groups that had been trying to document this problem had gathered. And they put them together to develop an estimate of mortality in North America alone. This is a really awful number. As many as 1 billion birds are killed every year flying into glass just in North America. The only thing that's worse is cats. So keep your cats indoors. It's much better for them, and it's much better for you, and it's much better for birds. Luckily, there's somebody else at ABC that deals with cats. Do we need birds? One of the reasons I have that video loop is I spend a lot of time talking to politicians and architects and people who aren't necessarily bird watchers or bird lovers. When architects deal with birds, generally, they're dealing with things like pigeons or gulls pooping on the roof, or house sparrows nesting in, side architectural features and so forth. Birds have intrinsic value. They have cultural value around the world. It's interesting to see how similar birds represent similar human values in different cultures. Birds contribute hundreds of billions of dollars in eco-services to agriculture. When California burns to the ground, it's birds that bring seeds in so that plants can regrow. Birds eat enormous numbers of pests that might give you West Nile virus. They eat things that destroy trees and crops and so forth. So birds are really valuable, and most of us have no idea that they're out there doing this all the time. And on top of that, bird watching is a huge industry. There are a lot of jobs that depend on bird watchers. And the number of bird watchers increased dramatically during COVID because so many people were at home trying to find something to do. So birds have a constituency, which is good. What do we need to know about this issue? Well, collisions are not rare. Almost everybody has seen one or heard one, but most people seem to think that it's an unusual occurrence. They don't really put it together to think how many birds are hitting windows, that everybody, even kids, have had this experience of seeing or hearing a collision. And the question that comes up really often in this context is, well, why don't we see dead birds all over the place? Well, there are a couple of answers to that. Birds can bounce off glass into foundation plantings. Birds are often swept up in the morning, even if they're not dead yet. But particularly because scavengers are really, really good at finding good things to eat. And a bird is a nice package of protein and fat. So especially good windows for scavengers, windows that kill a lot of birds, may actually be checked multiple times a day by animals that are looking for something to eat. So we're talking about things like raccoons, rats, skunks, crows, those cats, and so forth. And they're very good at finding and foraging. Almost any kind of bird you can think of has been recorded as hitting glass. But the majority of the birds that hit glass are songbirds, the kind of birds we saw in that video. These are birds that breed in the north and winter in the south. So twice a year, they're running the gamut of the built environment, moving from one habitat to another. Most of these birds migrate at night, and this can be confusing because most collisions actually take place by day. Birds migrate at night, they're high up in the sky. It's good because they don't have sun beating down on them. There are many fewer predators looking out for them. The winds tend to be calmer and so forth, but especially because most of them can't go the entire way without stopping. It's just as if you were going to drive from California to New York, you'd have to pull off the highway every so often. Well, these birds have to come down. They come down and then they forage during the day. So most collisions take place while birds are foraging during the day. There's a tendency to think of skyscrapers as the problem, skyscrapers as killing a lot of birds. In fact, skyscrapers kill only 1% of birds that are killed by collisions. About 45% are killed on homes and structures up to maybe 3 stories. And almost all of the rest are killed on low-rise buildings up to about 11 floors. Now, the reason for this is that birds are attracted to vegetation. That's where they find shelter. That's where they find food. They're attracted to reflections of vegetation. So if you look at that photograph on the right, you can't tell the real trees from the reflected trees, and neither can birds, nor can they tell the real sky from the reflected sky. So they just try to fly straight through the wall of that building or the picture window on the left. There's another issue here in that people believe they can see glass when they really can't. People are injured as they run into glass doors, sliding doors, glass walls all the time. And if I take away the cues that you use to tell you where glass is, because that's where you know how to find glass, you aren't seeing it. You can't tell me if this is a picture of a tree seen through clear glass, or the reflection of a tree. When I show you this picture, you know that there's got to be glass involved. You can see a crack, you see the mullions, but you don't know if that's a reflection or a see-through condition. It's only when I show you all of this that you know it's a reflection. Birds can't use any of those cues to tell them that glass is there. Because of this, they're very, very susceptible as they move around the built environment to trying to fly into reflections. They take what they see literally, essentially. It is possible for local birds to learn about individual pieces of glass, but they can't generalize. And that's what causes this problem. It helps to know a little bit more about how birds see the world and how it's different from how we see the world. We're primates. We've got eyes that are close together. We've got flat faces. We don't have a beak sticking out between our eyes. This gives us good depth perception, 3D vision, but we tend to perceive the world as something that we're moving into, something that's in front of us, you know, sort of like a drive-in movie. Birds have eyes on the opposite sides of their heads. I mean, just try to imagine seeing something different with each eye. They don't have very good depth perception, usually up to maybe the end of their beak, so they can decide if they want to eat what they've just picked up or feed it to a chick or put it into their nest. But they have different ways of knowing how fast they're flying and when they're going to get to their destination. They tend to perceive the world as something they're immersed in. What's out to the side and behind them can be just as important, especially if they are flying through open areas and don't think that there's any sort of complex habitat in front of them. My model of a bird in flight is actually a kid texting on a skateboard. And that's something I've seen a couple of times, but I've never been able to get a video of it. So the closest I've got is this guy texting on a hoverboard. You can see that his attention is not where he's going. He's focused on something else. And if there were suddenly an obstacle in his path, he would run right into it. And that is what happens to birds when they're not expecting glass to be there. Excuse me, I've got to get rid of the clicker. Thank you. So how do we stop collisions? We try to make birds believe they're flying towards a cluttered environment, towards tree branches or anything that they would prefer not to fly through, something that they want to fly around. You can do this by putting things on the outside of the glass. A standard insect screen on the outside of glass is a really cost-effective and very effective way of stopping collisions. You can put other kinds of things outside of glass. You can put louvers, external solar shades, and so forth. You can also incorporate things into and on glass. There's glass that's now sold to be bird friendly that incorporates bird friendly signals. And there are materials that you can use, you can put on your existing glass to make it bird friendly. The key thing for all of these is the spacing and that the visual elements are large enough for birds to be able to see. The spacing depends almost entirely on bird body size. It turns out that birds know very well how wide their wings are. And they will stop trying to fly through spaces that are too small for them. If we use the body size of small birds like this chickadee, we can make glass safe for small birds, and it will also be safe for large birds. So the general recommendation now is to use visual markers that are spaced no more than 2 inches apart. Now, it doesn't have to be something big. A 1/4 inch diameter dot is big enough for a bird to see from far enough away that it can change its flight path in time to avoid a collision. And I can see there's a typo on this slide. There are actually solutions that cover less than 1% of the glass that can be effective at deterring collisions. So what's a bird-friendly building? A lot of people that I work with are afraid that bird-friendly buildings are weird looking. In fact, people built bird-friendly buildings, you know, as almost as long as they've been building buildings. It's only recently that the glass industry has been able to fabricate these big panels that make buildings so dangerous for birds. Oops, sorry. If you want to, you can build a bird-friendly glass box. This is the Intuit headquarters in Mountain View. Mountain View actually has a law that requires bird-friendly design. So in this case, they have chosen a glass that has very narrow horizontal stripes. It's very effective at deterring collisions. From the parking lot, you don't even notice that there's a pattern on the glass. From the inside, you still get a good view out. So bird-friendly buildings don't have to be peculiar. Here's another one at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. This is the FBI headquarters in Houston. That weird green structure is a sunshade, but it also, if you look on the right side, you can see the glass on the left. This sunscreen actually blocks the view of the glass. So this also helps stop collisions on this building. It also is a security device because this is the FBI. This is the S.J. Quinney School of Law in Salt Lake City, where there are no requirements for bird-friendly design. They've used 3 strategies on this building: a bird-friendly glass, glass with louvers, and glass with screens. But what happens if you already have a building, which is, I assume, the case for most of you? There are solutions. There are lots of different ways that you can make glass safe for birds without having to spend a lot of money. On the right, you'll see the very cat that is trying to climb into my lap while I'm trying to talk to you. He's admiring a pattern that I drew on the glass using tempera paint. So this is something that can, be done for pennies, but it's highly effective if you use it. And interestingly, tempera has lasted up to a year on glass that I've worked with. It is very resistant to rain and so forth. On the left is a window film that's being put up at the Key West Airport. This is being put up on a building connector. The taxi drivers that wait underneath this building connector complained because so many birds were landing on their taxis. And the airport responded to that by making that glass safe for birds. This is one of the very first solutions that was ever promoted as something that is bird friendly. You may know it as bus wrap. If you've ever been on a shuttle bus between an airport and a parking lot, you know that the outside of the bus can have advertising on it, but from the inside you can see out. The building on the right is a NASA building. They had an entire flock of indigo buntings hit that glass, and they installed this to remediate that. You'll actually see this relatively frequently on federal buildings because it is one of the few things that meets the complicated requirements for what you can put on glass at a federal installation. On the left, you can see this same product being put up at another site. The top view is what it looks like on the outside. The bottom view is looking out from inside. There's another solution that is actually becoming much more common. It was invented in Canada, and it's very prevalent in places like Toronto, but they're starting to get a lot of jobs in the United States as well. It's called feather friendly. It goes up like a window film, but you pull the backing off. So what's left is the pattern. In this case, it's a pattern of dots, but you can actually have this made any way you want to. Instead of dots, it could be logos, it could be stripes, it could be little icons. It works extremely well. You don't see it very well from the outside. From the inside, it essentially vanishes as you look out against the background. ABC created something called bird tape. This was something that came about largely because putting a lot of decals on windows takes a lot of time, and I was looking for something that would be quicker. This is something that's intended to last for years. We've had some up at the University of Minnesota's St. Paul campus since 2015, and it's still going strong. So it's not something to put up if you're only intending to do it seasonally. But you can see there are a lot of different ways you can do this. The Virginia Zoo actually has a contest every year, and local artists come up with designs, and the winner then cuts out all these little pieces and puts them up on the exhibit glass. Interestingly, South Korea has really been doing a lot on collisions. They started with highway noise barriers, and in South Korea, it is required that any highway noise barrier have something on it. So they have a half a dozen companies that are now producing materials to make glass bird friendly. This is an easy one. You can get external shades, solar shades, that have suction cups. It's also an example, if you look on the left and the right of these two windows, the left window has pieces of bird tape on the outside. The right window has bird tape on the inside, and you see that the reflection makes it impossible to see what's behind it. You don't see what's on the inside of that glass. And this is something that comes up a lot. Can we do it from the inside? Generally, it won't be effective if you put it up on the inside. It is worth, if you're up on the 7th floor in an apartment, it's worth putting something on the inside of your window and going outside and looking up to see if it's visible. You would have to do that at different times of day because glass changes its appearance depending on the sun angle. But with most modern windows, reflections are so strong that you can't see behind the reflection. I am a paint fan. On the left, this is a local chiropractor, and every season they would have a sign painter come in and put up seasonally appropriate patterns on their glass. Top right, again at the University of British Columbia, they did this using a template and oil-based marking pens. And here are just some other examples. It can be really simple. The one on the middle I did with a corner of a sponge and just made little zigzags. Other people have gotten very creative and with designs, but this is something that you can, if you have a problem and you want to do something right away, you can do this. When I moved into my new home about a year ago, I was suddenly getting robins hitting my windows. So I ran out and got a pint of tempera paint and quickly put squiggles on my windows until I could spend the time to think about what I wanted for the long term. If you're using paint, you can use something called a stencil roller. This is the North Carolina Zoo. You can get these things on Amazon. It's a roller that's got a design on it. So it's a little more aesthetic, than just doing scribbles with a sponge, and it can look very nice. The nice thing about this tempera paint is that if you want it to come off, you just get it wet and then wipe it off with a sponge. It's really fast. Decals are the solution that most people are familiar with, and there's a serious problem with decals. Back in the 1940s, a German scientist named Konrad Lorenz did a study, and he hypothesized that there were shapes that birds interpreted as dangerous, as the shape of a predator, of a hawk diving from the sky. It was very quickly discovered that this was not true. People tried to replicate the experiment. They tried it on different kinds of critters, and it generally does not work. But this idea has been very powerful, and it has never gone away. So the idea that you could put this decal that was the silhouette of a raptor up on a window and birds would see and avoid that persists to this day, and it's dead wrong. Birds don't interpret silhouettes as live animals. What they see is an obstacle that they could fly around. So if you want to use decals, here are some examples using that 2-inch spacing. Decals are generally larger than they need to be to deter birds, but you can make a really nice design with them if you want to. And it's very appropriate for windows that you don't look out, most of the time. External motorized shades are great. The one on the left is from the house I just left in Pelham. You can put that shade down whenever you're not in the room, and you can raise it up when you are in the room. So it is also a great security device. If you put it down, potential thieves can't see through the window. The hotel on the right has done this big time. Obviously, they have not done this for birds. This is the Hotel Las Americas in Mexico City, but I think it's a great looking building. I said insect screens were great. If you don't have one, there's a company that will send you screens that you can put up using suction cups. You can actually, they have versions that you can put up on a sliding door. So those, they're very effective. If you only want them seasonally, you can pluck them off the glass and wrap them up until the next time you need them. Netting is something that people think about a lot. We don't really recommend it. It has to be very taut when you install it, and you have to monitor it very closely. If netting becomes loose, birds can become entangled in it. If there are holes in the netting, birds can get through and get trapped behind it. It can work very well under some circumstances, as you can see here on the Botanical Garden building in Chicago. Window film works very well. The window film on the left has a subtle horizontal stripe. It's not very easy to see on the window, but it is extremely effective on buildings. It is generally important that this kind of material be installed by professionals. I've tried to put this up myself, and it's like Laurel and Hardy doing wallpaper. It's very difficult if you aren't practiced in doing it and you don't have the right equipment. Acopian bird savers are another solution that are very cost effective. They can be quick and easy to put up, and they're extremely effective at deterring collisions. So here are a number of examples. On the left, this person has really strung her windows like a harp. She made frames that fit into the window area so that she could string them without having to do it while standing on a ladder. We're starting to see commercial applications of this solution. In the center, that's a building in Maryland that has a multiple story version of Acopian bird savers installed. It's something that you will often see on eco lodges in Latin America. It's generally made with paracord, but as you can see on the bottom right, you could make it with twine. You can really make it out of almost anything that you come up with. The important thing is the spacing and that it be offset from the window by a couple of inches. Bird crash preventers, this is a solution that's very similar. It's actually made in Santa Clara, California, and it's made out of fishing line. And this comes as a unit. So you simply install the hooks and put it up on your window. And that's the end. So you can find a lot of resources on our website at birdsmartglass.org. We have a searchable database of retrofit solutions as well as materials for new construction. We have a lot of things you can download, like the flyers on the left, which summarize everything I know in 2 pages. And we have a lot of examples of bird-friendly buildings. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
That was great, Chris. Thank you so much. I actually have a question about night, exterior lights at night. I know it's not exactly the same as the collision problem, but thought you might have some ideas about, people's
Yes.
security lights at night and how to
Absolutely.
maybe shade them in some way.
Lighting is definitely part of this whole issue, especially now because there is so much light pollution. Light attracts birds into the built environment, just the way moths are attracted by candle flames. We don't necessarily know from exactly what distance, what intensity of light causes attraction. It seems as though migrating birds are pretty safe when they're at height. When they're pushed down by bad weather, they come closer, or when they're coming down at the end of a migratory stage, they come down and they come within range of lights. And what people have found is that where you might expect birds to be distributed randomly across the countryside, they're much more concentrated in areas that are lit. We used to see, and I'm not saying that I ever saw this because it started in like the 1890s, but when they started lamping lighthouses, and then back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, when a city would have one skyscraper like the Fauché Tower in Minneapolis, or the Empire State Building, or something like the Washington Monument or the Statue of Liberty. When you have a very, very bright light source with darkness around it, birds will be attracted in large numbers and you get large collision events. I think this is one of the reasons there's been this connection between skyscrapers and collisions. We don't see those collision events very much anymore. They do happen, but they're rare. Unfortunately, the birds are being attracted into, any lit area. We know that street lights can change bird behavior, that parking lot lights can change bird behavior. So any lights you can turn out will help. They won't make buildings safe for birds because birds fly around so much. But the more buildings turn their lights out, the fewer birds will be found in a given area and the fewer collisions there will be. And as you said, there tends to be this feeling that lighting the night up brightly will make you safe. It's a bit of a spurious correlation. You can be safe at levels that are much, much lower than what people, it doesn't have to look, like Stalag 17 for people to be safe. And we're finding out that there are more and more and more negative health impacts on human health, not just on wildlife, and it's not just birds. Almost any kind of wildlife you can think of is negatively impacted by light. They're finding that birds that are exposed to light will start migrating north several days sooner than birds that are not. It impacts insects. Insects are disappearing as fast as birds are, if not faster. And lighting, artificial light at night, is one of the reasons that that's happening. So any lights that you can turn off or that you can put on a motion sensor is a step in the right direction.
I had heard that amber or yellow shaded, a different color of light might be better.
Unfortunately, that turns out not to be true. Or it doesn't turn out to be, you can't make lights safe by making them a particular color. What you have to do is first look to see if you need light at all. Then you have to see what the minimum lighting level is that you can use. Then what you want to do is make sure that your fixtures are shielded so light isn't trespassing out into areas where you don't need it. Third of all, there may be a role for color, but there are good things about yellow light. There are bad things about yellow light. There are good things about blue light and bad things about blue light. So it would be very situation dependent. There is no general color solution to this particular problem. one of the reasons that people think about amber lights is that over and over again, cities are replacing street lights with LEDs, and that certainly early on, the cheapest LEDs were bright blue. You often wind up with a light that was brighter than the light you had before, even though it was using less power. And it was very, very annoying to people that had to live around those lights. So amber street lights are definitely more pleasing to the people that have to live with them.
Oh, thank you. Other questions for Chris? Oh, okay, just one sec. And this is not exactly on topic, but related, and that is wind generation of power and the windmills that are being erected all around the world and how they affect birds.
Well, luckily for me, there's somebody else at ABC that does wind. Wind is a huge issue, and ABC strongly supports bird smart wind. You can put wind turbines in places that are not an enormous threat, although probably any wind turbine is going to chop up some birds. There's a serious problem when you put a big wind field where you know large numbers of birds are going to fly. So on a migratory pathway, for example, or there was an example in Holland where they put wind turbines between the nesting area for a colony of ibis and their feeding grounds. So unfortunately, there are no regulations really that require wind farm developers to think about where they're putting their wind farms. And in particular, birds of prey tend to be injured or killed by wind turbines, but also flocks of migrants have also, fallen prey to that. They've tried to come up with solutions that involve radar, either radar knowing that a bird is coming and making a flash to try to make the bird turn around, or in the case of flocks of birds, radar notifying the operator and the turbine being shut down while the flocks of birds go through. But they're not required to do that.
Obviously, more work needs to be done in your field. Good thing you're working so hard on everything.
Oh, yeah.
Here's another question for you.
Chris, do you have any idea? I mean, you showed examples of sort of huge commercial buildings that were big sheets of glass versus residential buildings that had picture windows. Do we have any idea of the distribution of the effect? Is this enormous number of birds being killed mostly in commercial areas, or is the
No, almost 44.5% of collisions take place on homes, and it isn't just picture windows. It really depends on the plantings and the surrounding area. I mean, there's so many factors that are part of this. But even small windows, I remember when we were testifying in San Francisco, one of the commissioners said, oh, they remember when they were a kid, there were 2 windows in their vestibule, tall, narrow windows in their vestibule, and you could see straight through them. And birds used to hit those all the time. And that's a fairly common experience.
So one of the things we're being made to do in Berkeley is to move plantings away from the house. You have to have, I think it's 12 feet of space between any bushes or trees and the house, and that's to prevent fire spread. Would that have any effect on this?
No, in fact, it can actually make it worse. I mean, if birds are attracted to vegetation, if the vegetation is relatively close to the glass and the birds try to fly to the reflection, the impact is less. But from 12 feet, they can get up enough speed to injure themselves. But fire prevention is good. So Berkeley has been considering a bird-friendly design ordinance. I don't know what stage it's in at the moment.
And what would that involve in this case?
It would probably require that insect screens be put on the outside of the windows instead of the inside, for example.
I mean, insects aren't a huge problem for us on the West Coast. And on the East Coast, you couldn't live in your house without screens on your windows. Here, we can open our windows and it's, except maybe in the height of summer, it's not a big
Well,
issue.
there are more expensive solutions.
Any other questions for Chris? Okay, Chris, well, thank you so much for that fascinating talk.
Thanks for inviting me. And you can always send questions later. I'm happy to answer them. All right, bye.
See you in person soon. Bye.
Thank you, Gillis and Ruth. Thank you, Gillis and Ruth, for knowing Chris and bringing her to the club. So let's turn in our name tags. We'll have a little drawing. Take a last snack before people pack up their snacks. Make sure you got all the plants you needed from the plant table. And if there was any other comment or announcement by anyone, please feel free to come up. Let me know. Right. So we're going to collect your name tags and then we're going to have a little drawing for some presents.